Welcome to a Q&A discussion with the authors of the book, Strategic Planning, an Interactive Process for Leaders, by Dr. Dan R. Ebner and Mr. Frederick L. Smith. This is a product of Fred's Strategic Leadership class in the Master of Organizational Leadership program offered by St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa. I'm Carrie Smith, your moderator, president of Health Marcom, a consulting agency for the health and medical industry. And now we take you to our program.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. And thank you to Dan.
Hey, thanks, Fred.
For coming to the class this evening. I really appreciate
It's
it.
great to be here.
And thank you to my strategic leadership class. Thank you for coming.
Good to see you all here.
Nothing like first-hand practical knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, we're open for questions. Carrie?
Yes, our first question tonight is from Dana. And what would you like to ask?
What is one of your favorite examples of a business implementing strategic planning?
All right. Okay. Thanks, Dana. There are so many to choose from, actually. I really enjoy working with Medic, which is a ambulance service here in the Quad Cities, and I just think that their business is really fascinating. And so the last 6 years that I've been working with them has been very fulfilling for me. And I've enjoyed working with the Bush Construction Company recently. They have such a fascinating business because it's constantly changing and it's very competitive and hard to find a profit margin within that kind of business. I worked with several Catholic schools recently in the last year and find it real interesting to see some similarities from one school to the other. But probably my favorite, and this is no surprise to Fred because we just wrote an article about our work with the Crawford Company, which is a heating, air conditioning, and plumbing business in Rock Island, which when I started working with them 6 or 7 years ago, they had like 70 employees, and they involved all 70 employees in this strategic planning process by involving them in a series of focus groups where each worker from Crawford had to participate in a focus group interview, and they also did the core values process that we describe in the book. So it was really great to see how many people got involved, and at the very end of the process, after the owners brought it all together and wrote up the strategic plan and implemented it after the first few years, they saw significant growth and brought me back in, and they're now about twice the size they used to be. And it's just been amazing to see how Crawford is coming together. And at the end of each time I do strategic planning with Crawford, they'll bring all the workers back together for a lunch meeting where we present the findings of what's in the strategic plan. And basically what I like about it is that they really build a lot of buy-in and get everybody at Crawford to feel like as if they have a stake in the strategic plan. So that's probably my best story right there is Crawford. Thanks, Dana.
My question is, what advice can you give the organization when you start the strategic plan?
Okay.
I'll take that one.
All right, Fred. Yeah.
Well, when we're meeting with potential clients, Dan and I both, we're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing us. And one of the first questions that we always ask is, why are you doing this strategic plan? Why? If you're just doing it because you think you need one, or you want that 8x10 glossy that you can lay on your desk, or you're just doing it for an accreditation process, we tell them, it's not for us. So why? So the first advice is, if you're going to do it right. Okay, because the only thing worse than not doing strategic planning for an organization and planning the future is doing it and then not doing anything about it. Because it's a lot of time and effort. You get people charged up all the time, and then to not do it is just disheartening. The second thing that we ask then is, how do you plan to implement it? And you wouldn't believe how many stares we get implementing it. Yeah, how are you actually going to implement it? Because we insist that there's an implementation plan associated with the strategic plan. Because if there's not, 9 times out of 10, it's going to fail. So for us, I think the two big things, why you want to do it, let's be serious about it. And let's go into it with great intent of implementing it, and then how are we going to implement it? And we spend a lot of time. We spend more time with clients talking about how they're going to implement it than how we're going to develop the strategic plan.
Absolutely.
Yes, have you, Fred and Dan, hi.
Yeah. Hey, John.
Have you come across any organizations where your lack of knowledge about the technical side of their business has been an obstacle in facilitating your strategic planning process?
We think it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
We think too much technical knowledge is a detriment.
Gets in the way.
It gets in the way, because that's why we're not a fan of internal facilitators, because it's hard to facilitate when you know too much about the business. And I like not knowing a whole lot about the business, and Dan as well, because that way when people start putting together goals and objectives and actions, it might make sense to you because you're so close to it, but as an outsider, we can look at the people and say, what are you trying to say? I don't understand. And a strategic planning document ought to be a marketing tool as well, okay? Maybe not the action plan, but the strategic plan itself. And if people don't understand it, it's not going to do you much good as a marketing tool. And so we facilitate all the time with organizations that we only have a 50,000-foot knowledge of what they do, and we think that's totally fine, and the process works, and turns out fine. I think that independence is actually a value.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know anything about heating, air conditioning, or plumbing, but they work pretty well at Crawford.
Yeah.
So, Dan and Fred, how could I persuade my management team to use your 8 steps to develop our next strategic plan rather than follow another strategic plan or planning module?
Okay, well.
Go ahead.
All right, okay, so first of all, I don't know that we persuade people to employ us as facilitators of a strategic planning process. I think it's really more a matter of listening. So when I sit down with a potential client and they want me to do strategic planning, or they're thinking about doing strategic planning, and I'm one of the candidates perhaps, and this is the way Fred and I both do it, is I sit down and I listen to what do they need. Because I've worked with about 150 organizations now, and every time it's been different. And every time their needs are different. And so from my perspective, the most important thing to do is to listen to what they need and to then try to cater our 8 steps toward what it is that they need and what's going to meet their interests. But I think that what works best, once I get into explaining, because eventually they'll say, well, you know, how would this fit? How would that fit? What I'm noticing, first of all, is that they're asking for a lot more focus groups these days. I think in large part because they're looking for more participation, more input from their employees and from other constituencies. And secondly, like Fred just said about the implementation, I make it real clear to them that, you know, if they don't plan to implement this, then let's not waste our time. So let's make every effort from step 1 to step 8, or however many steps there are, to make sure that everything we do increases the likelihood of implementation. And I think they like that. I think people are looking for more of that.
Yeah, and we actually, in our proposals to facilitate strategic plans, put that we will attend their first follow-up session. Because we're so serious about the need to implement that we go back for the first accountability session, as we call them in the book, to help them make sure that they implement the actions that they've laid out for that particular time period.
Yeah, it's written right into the contracts. Other thing we really like to try to tell people is that we don't have the answers. And sometimes that shocks them at first. It's like, what do you mean you don't have the answers? It's like, no, I believe that you have the answers already there in your group. And my job is really to just facilitate a process whereby you come up with the answers to your most perplexing questions.
I think what I would offer to your management is this is a simple process. This is a very simple process. It's 8 steps. We can do it in 3 to 4 hour sessions. We don't need a retreat. We don't need a week long. We don't need 6 months long. There's a lot of upfront work that's required. But this is a very simple, straightforward process. And our clients tell us all the time that this is the best strategic planning process that we've ever been in.
Yeah, tried and true.
Me and friend Dan, I was curious, since the release of the book, how students provided feedback on their views of the book.
Well, are you?
Well,
It's
We could
interesting.
throw that question back on you.
It's interesting, Tanner. Dan and I have taught this class for quite a few years, and we've used other textbooks that were extremely good and extremely excruciating. Okay, very, very deep, very, very detailed. And we felt like for this 8-week class, we don't want to go down to an extremely detailed level. You're probably not going to be facilitating strategic plans professionally, maybe privately or personally, we thought you needed enough knowledge to where you would be able to understand the strategic planning process, understand the value of it, and maybe help some folks along the way. But we couldn't find one. And we talked about this for a couple of years, and we said, you know what, we just need to write one. And it took us a while.
Yeah, 10 years.
But we finally got around to writing a simple, straightforward book, keeping with today's trends of talking about the theory and then talking about the practical applications that we've experienced over the years. So you're going to read about the 8 steps and the process, but then you're also going to read about the experiences that Dan and I have had facilitating these sessions. And I think that's what brings a great value. So the students consistently have talked about how great the book is, how much easier it is to read, and they're actually encouraging us to write some other books to simplify some other readings that are pretty complicated.
Yeah, maybe some other coursework in the MOL
Yeah.
program, right?
So yeah, it's been very well received, Dan. Thanks.
Dan, Fred, have many organizations contacted you about strategic planning since the release of your book?
All right, well, another good question. Thanks, Jesse. Well, I had a pretty healthy strategic planning business, Jesse, before we wrote the book. I was probably doing about 15 or 20 organizations per year. I think the big difference since the book came out is that it's kind of taken our work more nationally. Like I've done strategic planning now for a couple of national organizations in the last year, and I've gone to Brownsville, Texas, and San Diego, and Maryland, and Indianapolis, and different places now to do strategic planning because the book's out there and people are seeing what we can do. The big difference, I think, is that most of the national strategic planners are specific to a certain occupation or a certain type of organization. So you'll have a national organization, for example, that does fire departments all over the country, or they do park and recreation departments, or they do heating and air conditioning businesses, or construction companies. So they specialize in a certain kind of business, and then they come in and they tell people what to do. Now those are the kind of strategic planners who make a lot more money than Fred and I do because they have subject matter expertise in a certain kind of business. But the problem is that they tell you what to do. And they give you a strategic plan that looks like the same strategic plan that they left in Peoria and Rockford and Cedar Rapids and other cities that are similar to yours. And so it just doesn't work, I think, to be a content strategic planner. We're what we call process strategic planners, where we're really trying to try to bring out the best in the people who are there and get the best answers from the people who are congregated. And so I think that makes us pretty unique when we take strategic planning to the national level.
And that's why our process works for nonprofits, for-profits, public organizations. Sometimes you'll see a book, Strategic Planning for Public and Nonprofits, and you'll see Strategic Planning for for-profits. Our process works, I don't care what your organization is. I don't care how big it is, how small it is, what you're doing. We think the process works, it's simple, it's straightforward, and we're big advocates of it, obviously.
Yeah.
Dan and Fred, hi.
Yeah, hi.
Can we help us understand the concept of strategic thinking? What is Dan's aim to strategic planning?
Okay.
Well, that goes in line with our comments about the need to implement. All right, developing a strategic plan, I think, is the easy part. That's the easy part. Give us 3-4 hours, 2 sessions.
Yeah.
We can help you facilitate a nice strategic plan. But it's up to the organization to do something with it. And strategic thinking is the idea that now that I've done that strategic plan, and I have this in my head, I'm thinking about this every day. My decisions are made based upon the work that we put into our strategic plan. It doesn't do an organization any good to develop this strategic plan and not act on it. And by act on it, I mean eat, breathe it, live it every day. So the strategic thinking, when I'm thinking about something or I have a decision to make, I've got this strategic plan in the back of my head. And I use it. I use it to make decisions. I use it for budgeting decisions. That's what we talk about when the question came out earlier, what advice can you give the organization? Get serious about this. If you're not serious about it, don't waste your time. It's just going to sit on the shelf. You're going to waste a lot of time. But you need to go into it with your eyes open, and you need to understand there's a lot of people that care about this, and I'm planning the future of this organization. And I need to understand it and act on it and think about it and make decisions according to those strategic discussions that we had that led to that plan.
Yeah, like Fred says, strategic thinking is what takes place after you finish strategic planning, and it's just ongoing, it's continuous. So the strategic thinking can begin in strategic planning because, it forces us to think strategically, but like Fred said, we have to continuously be thinking strategically about everything that's going on, and then updating and reviewing our strategic plan and changing the action steps accordingly, because we all know that change is occurring so rapidly that what we wrote yesterday isn't necessarily going to apply today, and we've got to continuously think strategically about what those changes are and how that affects our business. Anyone else have other questions? Follow-up questions to?
No? Well,
Okay.
I want to thank Carrie Smith
Yes,
for
Carrie Lynn Smith,
moderating
thank you
this.
very much.
And to my strategic leadership class.
Yeah, thank you for the class.